I'm John Batchelor. After the massacre in Paris, the war against the killers is a vast battlefield. And we will be back to Paris in a moment, but we go now to Afghanistan, where it all started in October, immediately after the attack on New York and Washington of 2001. Bill Roggio and Tom Joscelyn continue with me, the Foundation of the Defense of Democracy's Long War Journal. Bill, you have a report up about the Afghan army surrendering. How and why?
Yes, John. Now, in the about 65 Afghan soldiers and 5 officers are reported to have surrendered in the district of Sangin in Helmand province. The Taliban besieged their base. This is about a company of troops, by the way. The Taliban besieged their base for about 2 weeks before they ultimately surrendered, very likely ran out of supplies and food. The Afghan military and police were powerless to help them, so they surrendered their weapons to the Taliban, and it's unclear whether the Taliban are releasing them, holding them, trying to convert them. We don't really know what's happening, but it's just further evidence of the deteriorating security situation in the south. And by the way, I'm seeing other reports of defections to the Taliban. I haven't seen it from army units, but typically these Arbakai, what they're called Arbakai, or tribal militia that were put together, or the Afghan local police, which was a government program, U.S. government program. We're seeing large numbers of these defecting, a report of 150 in Faryab province, although I haven't been able to confirm that.
Bill, you've been following the districts and the provinces that are weakening. This one in Helmand province, is this a significant blow, or did we know this had already gone over to the dark side, and so it's just consistent with the strength of the Taliban in the region?
It's a little bit of both, because we know the Taliban are growing in strength in the south. It should come as no shock to anyone. But I think what is ultimately disturbing about these reports is that now we're seeing the reports of the Afghan military personnel surrendering. That in itself is far more, I think that shows a hastening of the deterioration in southern Afghanistan.
In other words, the word is out, don't fight, quit, and go over.
Exactly right. I mean, once it gets to that level, and the Afghan Taliban be wise. Hate to give them advice, but they're probably not listening. Be wise, and they probably know it anyway. Be wise not to execute them. Just let them go home, and hope they don't come back to the battlefield, because it just sends the message to the others: hey, all we got to do is just
right,
lay down our arms and we'll be.
We don't know if they were green troops or veteran troops. We don't have that detail. Is that correct?
We don't have the details of what degree of troops these were.
Tom, you have a report then. This is an important development in Iraq. The Kurdish forces against ISIS itself, the same ISIS that just attacked Paris. Well, its agents did. This is the Sinjar region. A year ago, you will all recall, my producer Lee Mason and her colleague Bill Devlin, whom I will talk to later on this evening in Paris, traveled to Kurdistan, to Dohuk, to the camps of the Yazidis who had fled Mount Sinjar. And now the Kurds are leading a strike back. Successful, Tom?
So far, it looks like it has been successful. This is part of a bigger effort, which is not proven successful yet, but it seems to be making progress, where they're trying to basically cut off the Islamic State from being able to easily, I would say, resupply and reinforce its forces on both sides of the border, Iraq and Syria. So what's happening here is you have two things kind of concurrently going on. One, there was a push by the Kurdish forces into Sinjar, which fell to the Islamic State in August of last year and precipitated the humanitarian crisis you talked about, with the brutal systematic massacring of the Yazidis and also the systematic rape of Yazidi women and girls. There's still a number of Yazidi girls and women in custody of the Islamic State, being held as sex slaves and prisoners. Really one of the more despicable things you can read about. And on top of that, what's happening here is that, and so the Kurdish forces have made progress in pushing into Sinjar itself. On top of that, what they're trying to do is there's this Highway 47, it's called, that runs basically from Mosul past the Mount Sinjar into Syria. And the idea is that if you can cut off or take control of that highway, you can basically make it very difficult for the Islamic State, not very difficult, more difficult, let's say, for the Islamic State to move its forces back and forth across the border.
And the significance of taking back Mount Sinjar, if I understand it, the Kurds will go that far, but they're not strong enough or not intentioning to move south to Mosul. Is that correct, Tom?
Yeah, I don't think the Kurds can take Mosul or move far. I mean, basically, if you're dealing in certain areas where the Kurds are traditionally strong because they have an ethnic base there, they have grassroots there, so that's sort of their home turf, so to speak. So it makes sense for them to be able to push back the Islamic State in certain areas, basically of, for example, northeastern Syria, and also in parts of northern Iraq. Sort of that whole thing. But other areas where they're predominantly Sunni-dominated, Arab Sunni-dominated that are, not Kurds, that's going to be a more difficult sell to try and to get the Kurds to go in those areas, and they're probably not going to.
Gentlemen, we have a minute here, and I'd like to call on both of you to voice your experience with analyzing the complex attacks at Kabul, at Baghdad over these many years. You've reported it at Long War Journal. Looking at what we know about the attack in Paris, I'll begin with you, Tom. Is this an attack that is portable? Would it work in any city, or did they require the homegrown terrorists in the Banlieues and other parts, European citizens, to launch that attack?
Yeah, I think what makes this portable is not the homegrown part of it. I mean, they obviously had some knowledge of the Paris landscape, of course, and that helped them. But basically, there are all sorts of elements of this because it was modeled after a Mumbai-style attack from November 2008. Right. And that's really the model that if you ask NYPD, if you ask a lot of counterterrorism officials, that scares them because it is portable, because all it requires is light arms and some sort of savvy and sophistication how you move with your weapon and how you conduct yourself, which you can pick up in a training camp. There are many training camps now around the world, and you can very quickly, if you have a cadre of operatives, basically shut down a major metropolitan area for a good amount of time.
10 seconds, Bill. Can it cross the Atlantic, that attack style?
Absolutely. I see no reason why. As long as they could get the operatives here, or recruit them locally, it could happen here.
Bill Roggio, Tom Joscelyn, Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. I'm John Batchelor.